plan out your week at the beginning or whatever planning looks like. So, what is actually going to move the needle in your business? Is it prospecting? Is it building out those back end systems? Is it keeping track of your CRM? Is it marketing on different platforms? So, figuring out what works specific for your business is huge because everybody's different. And a business coach, if they're good, will not tell you what to do, but advise you. And they'll help you figure out your own insights into your business because nobody knows your business like you do, even if you're growing.
Are you ready to meet a woman who's redefining healthcare leadership? Today, we're diving into the extraordinary story of Adrianna, a powerhouse who's bridging the gap between nursing and entrepreneurship. Imagine transforming a decade of frontline medical experience into a thriving coaching and consulting career. That's exactly what Adrianna did. She's not just any executive coach. She's a nurse turned change maker, using her unique insights to revolutionize healthcare from the inside out. From guiding professional women to new career heights to leading game-changing projects in hospitals, Adrianna is proof that with passion and expertise, you can make waves in any industry. Get ready to be inspired, challenged, and maybe even rethink your own career path. This is the story of how one nurse's mission to help people evolved into a business that's reshaping the future of healthcare. Let's welcome Adrianna to Entrepreneurship by Design with Dr. C. And I am so honored and so happy to have Adrianna with us today. Thank you so much for coming on.
I am so happy to be here spending this time with you. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's such an honor to have you. And I would love for you to just tell everyone, how did you get here today from nursing to now executive coaching, helping so many people? What was that journey like for you?
It was bumpy. Like I'm gonna be
It was.
so real. It's not like I
Yes.
woke up one day and I was like, oh, I'm gonna be a coach. It's kind of the same way I stumbled into nursing. I just found myself wanting to help people. I thought I wanted to be a pharmacist. I shadowed a pharmacist and a nurse. I was like, oh, I like working with people. I want to be around people. Let's go into nursing. And then through nursing, I worked in the neonatal ICU, which was great, but I missed talking to people. So I went downstairs to the ER. And I learned in that setting, in an inner city Chicago ER, how to handle conflict and how to establish my own boundaries. By nature, I am very introverted, conflict avoidant, put people before myself. And as an ER nurse, you can't do that. You have to be thinking on behalf of patients for patients and then maintaining my own healthy boundaries. And that was kind of a pattern that prevailed as I moved into like trauma ERs, rapid response, and then management, and then other leadership type roles throughout my career. And then finally, and I'm sure that you've heard this trend either with yourself or with other people that you've interviewed, when I started getting intentional, that's when I figured out that I like helping other people develop themselves. That was my favorite part of being a manager. As a nurse, it was teaching patients how to advocate for themselves, how to put themselves first, why they need to take these medications, not just telling people to do things, but truly coaching them. And then looking back, I realized I've been coaching people since 2017 when I started precepting new nurses. And I think it was only in the past few months that I really realized that I was like, oh my gosh, I want to help other people that are in leadership roles. So it has been a journey and just a lot of intentional self-reflection, but it was definitely bumpy. And I'm sure that we'll get into those little bumps. I'm happy to share them, but it's been really, really good because it's true to my purpose and how I want to help people.
I love it. And it's so interesting because I know now you really help people with
Mhm.
communication,
Yeah.
boundaries, but it's just so surprising, even when I first met you, because you're very open and you talk and you don't seem very introverted whatsoever or conflict avoidant, but that's how it started before you even got to the ER. I'm curious, in that process of really having to set those boundaries and everything like that, what did that look like in that initial from going downstairs to the ER trauma, like everything's happening and having to really set those strong boundaries? What did that look like for you?
Oh, I was a deer in the headlights for a long time. And when I say inner city, busy Chicago ER, like I want you to imagine like it was busy. It was high volume, lots of different people coming through the front doors. And I was used to dealing with babies, can't talk, dealing with everybody, big talk. And I think I started noticing how I felt coming home at the end of the day. And so I didn't think to myself, probably like a lot of people, oh, I have issues with boundaries. I would come home and notice, like, wow, I'm always tired. Wow, being around these types of people was really draining. Wow, that conversation was really tough. Or oh my gosh, I didn't say something, I avoided this issue, and now it's grown into a much bigger problem. So it wasn't a very obvious revelation where I thought to myself, my boundaries are being crossed. I didn't have any boundaries. It was just picking up on the effects of it and then working my way backwards and realizing that boundaries are a big part of self-care. And I didn't want to come home from work feeling stressed all the time. I didn't want to let other people dictate my emotions because that was really what I was letting people do. I was letting people control me. And going through life, I think, especially when I'm in a position to work with the public so frequently, that's something that's going to come up. So I needed to have a very strong sense of self and boundaries. And of course, it's always a work in progress, but that's just something I will keep speaking to because the stronger those boundaries become, I think the more fulfillment and enjoyment we have out of life.
Oh, so well said. And I so believe boundaries are a form of self-care. I think
Yes.
it's so important and very similar to you. I didn't know what boundaries were because they were just always crossed when I first started therapy or just even
Mhm.
prior to that. And so many people don't know what their boundaries are until they're crossed because you start
Mhm.
to feel it physically. You were feeling tired. Oh, okay,
Mhm.
I didn't address this conversation. Like you don't always notice it. And because you really work so heavily in leadership aspects, really helping in the coaching world now, what are some of the common misconceptions about boundaries that you see when you start working within a leadership aspect or management?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. And I have like two big thoughts that come to
Yeah.
mind. The first one is people are like, I don't want to be mean though. I don't want to be mean. And that's when the coaching relationship really begins. I'm like, well, what does that mean to you? Like, how have people set boundaries with you? Like, do you feel like you're mean? And so the first thing I hear is, I don't want to be mean. And I think that has a lot of back end peeling away the layers that we do as a coach and then figuring out how we're going to troubleshoot it moving forward. And then I say boundaries, and other people think I do not like that word. And so figuring out a different word to use for boundaries, I'm like, let's just plant the fence here. Or we can say this is like a soft line. And then we have our hard lines. Imagine a dartboard. It doesn't have to be like, yes, no, I'm not telling people to behave like toddlers or advising that. Sometimes it is appropriate to say no, but the big things that come to mind are people associate it with being mean or not being kind, and also just having a total aversion to the word altogether.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more. I always thought I was mean by like setting boundaries at first because it's like uncomfortable,
Mhm.
especially being a former people pleaser. I'm like, well,
Mhm.
I don't want to rock the boat. And I was just having this conversation yesterday with a friend about like how that really evolves when you start to realize that you're being kind to yourself by setting boundaries. And that's what I hear you saying as well. It's more of
Mhm.
you're not being mean, you're just standing up for yourself, you're honoring and respecting yourself versus being like mean or rude or cruel or I don't want to like upset them. It's about like you're upsetting yourself every time you don't set a boundary.
Right, right. And we matter. Our thoughts and feelings matter. And especially for the people I coach to that are in leadership roles, I'm like, arguably, you have one of the most important positions because your mood, your actions influence the rest of the team. So, shouldn't you be investing in yourself that much more when everything that you do trickles down to the rest of the organization? And you have to put yourself first because you're also a mentor, even if you don't see yourself in a mentorship relationship or not. So, the stronger of boundaries you have and the better you are to advocate for yourself, you can help your direct reports do the same or anybody else that works with you.
So true. I feel like we could talk about this topic for like days,
Yeah, I
literally.
love boundaries. I
But
love
we're
it.
not
I could
going
talk
to
about this.
today.
Yeah.
You can find out more later. But like, I'm just curious. So once you started setting these boundaries, you moved up into management, you were managing teams, other nurses and whatnot. What was that step once you went from managing and leadership roles to now coaching? What provoked you to start your own business essentially?
Oh gosh. So I've always kind of had this like itch in the back of my head being like, I want to own a business, but I just don't know what I want to do. I don't know what I'm good at. And I think the big impetus for me was one of my last management jobs. I had the opportunity to work with a really cool coach, and I saw how valuable that type of relationship could be because I felt empowered to do things, be more decisive. I started developing some really wonderful employees. I was able to have difficult conversations with a lot more intentionality and professionalism to make sure that it wasn't me talking at people. Like I wanted to always be a good boss, and that helped me become the boss that I wanted to be. And that's difficult at times to be a people leader. It's so funny, and I've never really said this out loud. In my last job, I loved the team that I worked for, my boss, the executive director, my direct reports, and I had a stay interview in the company because I was doing really well. And I think that the people that I reported to saw me moving up in the organization. And I at one point was asked, like, would you want to do this job? And instead of being excited at the idea of climbing the corporate ladder, I freaked out. And I was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. I thought this was my dream. That's why I have my master's degree, leadership certification. And it totally like shattered my world. And that was a sign to myself that I needed to dig into that emotion a little bit more. And I realized that I really wanted to invest in myself and start creating my own company and my own form of income, leaning into work that gave me a lot more purpose that I enjoyed doing. So it's because I had the internal freak out when I was asked to like essentially climb the ladder, and I never thought that would happen before.
It's crazy, but when we trust our gut, so much can happen. And I think that stronger voice, because you always kind of knew you wanted to have your own thing, but it was just more of like maybe, okay, not at this moment or whatnot,
Mhm.
but being able to move forward. And I think it's just when we really get impacted of like, okay, well, you can move up, and you're like, no, I don't want to. I
Mhm.
like that feeling. And I'm so glad you listened to that. And once you started to create your own business, what were those steps in the beginning that you started to take?
Yeah. So I'm lucky I found a business coaching program which helped me ideate ideas of what I wanted to do, articulate my offer, which has changed so much in the past year. And I'm happy it has changed because it's never going to be perfect on the first go round. So the coach really emphasized a C plus mindset rather than trying to be a perfectionist, which is really good. So that was really helpful. And then I started reaching out to people that were entrepreneurs in my circle, which wasn't a lot because I'm a registered nurse in a 9 to 5 type employee by training. So I started asking my husband, who's an entrepreneur, lots of questions. I had luckily met a lot of really wonderful people along the journey that had side gigs. So really tapping on their shoulders, treating them to coffee dates, just being like, what was it like for you? And then joining the chambers of commerce was really helpful because I met other entrepreneurs that were also on this journey. And then the people that I really started bonding with are people that shared their journey more vulnerably with me because entrepreneurship isn't all glitz and glamour. Like it's a lot of behind the scenes hard work, and it's just a lot of repetition when you feel like the needle isn't moving at all. And so the people that I found myself leaning on, and I'm attracted to working with people, so this is how I build my business, are people that I could learn from and have like little pieces of mentorship from as I grow my business. So that is kind of like, and I hope this answers the question. I feel like I kind of got onto a little tangent here. How I started building the business was just leaning on people and then actually articulating the work that I wanted to do.
Mm, I love that. I want to go back to what you said about having a C minus or C plus or C mindset,
Yeah.
basically. But I think
Mhm.
that's so important because when you start, like I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I wish I heard that when
Me
I
too.
started.
Mhm.
And I feel like a lot of people listening might be as well.
Yeah.
So this is your sign. Have
Yes.
a C minus, C plus, whatever mindset, but really
Mhm.
understanding that it's never going to be perfect and it evolves. Like just how much you said it's evolved last year, even the
Mhm.
last 7 years since I started, everything has shifted in so many ways. I might be going back to like what I started with. So it's crazy how we can really morph and change. And that's entrepreneurship, knowing when to pivot, knowing that it's never a standstill because everything else around us is moving and change is the only constant in life. So
Mhm.
understanding that aspect, but I think that's so important. And I think more people need to realize that as well. Like you might get it right on the first time. If you do, amazing. That's
Mhm.
not everyone's story for the most part. But I love that you started to lean on people that have been in the field, that asking them questions, taking them on coffee dates, joining chambers, like joining groups that were like-minded individuals to
Mhm.
create that community. Because one of my main core values is community. And even creating this channel and other people I get to meet, like yourself and others in person, is so important to me. But I think that is a foundational piece of building business is building relationships, because relationships is what they might not be able to help you, but indirectly help you or connect you with somebody who's going to help you. We just never know who we're going to meet. And I think that's a beautiful thing that you really leaned into that. And I'm curious, so as you started to meet all these amazing people, kind of collecting people into like your circle, What were some of the obstacles like behind the scenes? Because like you said, it's not all glitz and glam. I mean, I've said that too. Like I feel like there's so much happening behind the scenes. What did it actually take to get you here?
Okay. So I think that I didn't realize how much software is required to be an entrepreneur. And I say software because I mean, like, oh, how am I going to process payments? How am I going to send people contracts? How am I going to advertise my services? Am I going to be on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn? Like, figuring out how I want to market myself, where my ideal client lives. So, I mean, luckily, one of my girlfriends that I went to nursing school with over 10 years ago, she saw what I was doing because I was advertising my services to frontline nurses. And this is where the C plus offer, like it has evolved. But this is how she found me. And she and her boyfriend created an online CRM platform. So I didn't know like how much work goes into building a website. Do I even need a website? Like I think all those little details to even get my name out there, I had no idea how big it was. And so balancing the day-to-day minutia of building how your business will operate on top of ideating goals. So that way I'm like working towards something. It's not like I just showed up to work where I was a manager and I had my work defined for me. I like also have to now be the CEO and visionary of this company and keep progressing and holding myself accountable. So like building those systems where like I have my whiteboard that I update my quarterly and annual goals, like where do I want to be in 5 years, 10 years, like how has my ideal client evolved? So balancing the behind the scenes, I had no idea how much work went into that. And then also ideating as well, which are two different ways of using my brain. And I much prefer ideation over the day-to-day minutia, which is funny. I didn't know that about myself. So you need both. And that is a skill set I did not ever plan on developing, but I'm so happy I'm here because it's made me more accountable to my time.
Absolutely. And I love that you said it because it's like two parts of your brain that you're using on
Hmm.
a daily basis or like on a regular basis at least. But I love that you really alluded to that there's so much that goes on behind the scenes of having systems. Like how are you going to take payment? What
Hmm.
are contracts? Like where are you going to market yourself? What platform is going to be where your audience is? All the things that you might not know in the beginning. I had no idea. Like I had a business coach in the beginning. I
Hmm.
learned a little bit about tech, but then like I had no idea how to actually build the business
Hmm.
piece, which I feel like when we're thinking about ideas, we're creative, we're excited about things. That's how I like love living in that space. But I'm like,
Yeah.
come back down to reality. Like you have
Yes.
to have that
Yeah.
balance. And
Hmm.
it is hard when you're doing it all by yourself. And I think a lot of times when we see things on social media before we start a business, and
Hmm.
everyone looks at it differently, but you see people that are traveling all the time and have all this like a luxury life that they're entrepreneurs and doing everything from their phone, but what's really happening behind the scenes. And I think
Hmm.
it's having things in place, having systems in place, and software especially. Is there a particular software that you use on the back end that's like really helped you organize everything?
Yeah. So I use this platform called Alter Aim. I'd be happy to send you the link. And it has the automations for my website. So my website is through that platform. I could send newsletters, everything like that. I don't run ads, but I have the capacity to do that. It just, yeah, publish blogs. It has everything I need for the back end. And then I could take payments through Stripe. I also use HoneyBook a lot because it just centralizes any contract and then also any form of payment that things are going through. And then it's highly customizable, but also very user friendly. So I like to use HoneyBook. Before I used HoneyBook, I just had people Venmo me and confirm via email to the terms of my coaching, which is fine too. And then I realized I wanted something a little bit more formalized in case worst case scenario to protect myself. And now that I'm growing and working with some larger organizations, I highly recommend people work with a lawyer, whether it's to trademark your services or draft up contracts that are a little bit more refined because you could write anything on a contract, but it doesn't mean it's going to stand up. And there's a lot of legalities. I don't know. I'm a registered nurse and I'm a now a, like a almost a certified coach. So like I those are things that I just don't know. So I think businesses like Zen Business or LegalZoom, those have been really helpful too. But the Altram and the HoneyBook have been the two biggest software platforms that I've utilized, and they've been really wonderful.
So many great resources there. And so I'm curious, once you've like, okay, you have all your software, you're building
Mhm.
your business, you're getting yourself out there. I'm so curious because you've had a lot of success. You've had so many great clients. I want to know what's one or two client success stories. I know you've had way more than that, but if you could share just one or two client success stories with us.
Yes. Okay. The first one that comes to mind is a woman that I helped, and she is a project manager and she works a lot with other people. She doesn't have any direct reports, but she's in charge of a really big project and it was new work. And as a project manager, I think having really intentional boundaries is big because people can very easily say, oh, that's part of the project and just delegate it to you. And that's what was happening. This individual has a 40-hour work week that was creeping up to 50, 55, 60 hours a week routinely, on top of the emotional burden of being emailed and outreach by people to check in on the status of certain things. And they were just so overwhelmed. And I want to work with people like this that come to me and they're like, I am so overwhelmed, because it's amazing how quickly we could take them, even just like after one or two sessions, to I'm feeling back to on top of the world. And so after one session, I worked with this individual to help them cut off a meeting when it was kind of devolving into chaos and they were having a hard time keeping things on track, which was helpful because the person that was in the meeting with this woman came back and apologized for their behavior. And I'm so proud of her. I get chills thinking about it because this person came to me being like, I don't know if I could do this. I don't know if I could set boundaries with this person. And they did it. And that's all through a simple, like, this meeting is no longer productive. I'm going to cut it off and we can reconvene. And it just like set the tone for the relationship for the past several months now. Like things are going really well. Then after the second meeting, learning how to up manage when they feel they're not getting support from their boss. And so this individual now has a way different relationship with work, not feeling super stressed. And we were able to do that with very simple, like, daily mantras to like help them stay centered as they enter very busy work days, phrases that they feel comfortable exercising. So things are top of mind as clear communication, boundary setting, and executive presence becomes a routine practice.
Mhm.
That was really, really, really a wonderful, like, best case scenario. And then another one, I did a group coaching for firefighters.
Mhm.
And this was really cool. And this is kind of where the consulting part of my business comes in. It's mostly coaching, but there's like a little aspect of consulting. And this team had a lot of conflict on the front lines, which makes sense. Firefighters live together for 24 hours at a time, firefighters and paramedics. So I would imagine there'd be conflict. And it just blew my mind the more I talked to the leadership team. And I understand how firefighters communicate with each other, especially when tension arises. Because of my background in ER nursing, everything is very protocol driven. So I came up with a communication protocol for them where they triage the situation first, they deliver direct feedback, they engage in conversation, and then they do closed loop communication. So I wanted to tap into that same part of their brain that they used during emergencies. So that way they could fall back on it. And I think that I didn't have the opportunity to work with them on a continual basis, but creating a cheat sheet for them and getting feedback from a lot of firefighters that it was very helpful because they had never visually seen how to approach a difficult conversation, and something to practice with each other was really helpful. So it felt really good to give back to the first responder community because I know those jobs are very stressful. So I would say those are my two really, really big success stories. And I'm working with other clients now, and I can't wait to report back on how that's been going too.
I love it. And I love just the diversity of like the clientele that you work with as
Mm.
well, like with the coaching aspect, because I know that's like your bread and butter. That's like where
Yeah.
you're doing so much work. And now I know you work with hospitals and other capacities as well, like more team
Hmm.
oriented. But
Hmm.
the aspect of making things visual, because I think a lot of times people, well, I can only speak from my experience and just like from other people I've spoken to and yourself, is that we're not taught how to communicate or resolve conflict as like
No.
a whole generalization. Obviously, there are like select few that do, but with all the experience that you've had and all the clients that you have worked with, because those are two amazing highlighted stories, just having the visual, but also being able to speak up for ourselves as well and like asking for what we need or cutting things off of like, nope, not doing this. What do you think is so primary when it comes to communication that people are missing the boat on when there is conflict and like being able to resolve it?
I'm just going to take 1 second because that's such a good question. Speaking from my own personal experience, and then a lot of people that I work with, because I've worked with a lot of different personality types, people that are extremely passive and they'll just agree to do things. And then on the other end, people that are very dominant. What I see a lot of people missing the boat on, that's such a good phrase to use, is taking that moment to pause before responding instead of just jumping straight into the fire, running into the burning building, being like, what is the goal that I want for this? And then thinking like, how do I want to feel when this conversation is happening? Like, what do I really want to say? So I I think people think they need to respond so quickly when in reality, if you I mean, even what I just did when I said I'm going to take a second and think for myself, like that's what I encourage everyone to do,
Yeah.
especially when it's stressful because words and our responses, it's like a tube of toothpaste. Once you squeeze out the toothpaste, it can't go back in. And so just taking that extra little bit of intention and framing how you want to approach it and just taking a deep breath and realizing that there's no imminent danger 99.9% of the time, that's okay. You can take a few moments to formulate a response.
Mhm. I love that answer. I think that is so important when it comes to avoiding like a big explosion of a
Yeah.
like a conversation that could be just a conversation versus a whole like argument and a yelling match. They
Yeah.
see that all the time in my couples counseling. Like I loved when they would yell me off as then I'm like, okay, you're showing your true colors of what's going on.
Yes.
Now I can actually help you. But
Yes.
I think it's even with my husband and I, like anytime I'm upset about something, I'm like, I need to process this before I get upset. So like, of
Hmm.
course I might be crying first and then I'm like, okay, I'm okay. Like, this is why I'm upset. Now I
Yes.
understand.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
got it.
I do the same thing. Like I'll be like, I'm feeling big emotions right now, and I don't know if I could put good words to it just yet. And like I'll say
Yeah.
that. I'm like, I have a big emotion, but I don't know what it is yet. And that's okay. And like at work, bring the vulnerability. As a boss, like my employees have seen me say, like, wow, I'm not feeling good about this. I feel like angry. And I'll speak to like what I'm feeling because that's a part of who I am. And I can't just shut it off at work. So like those emotions and be able to articulate it. Spot on. Exactly. Yeah, just taking the time and honoring them. Like you're not wrong for feeling a certain way.
Exactly. I mean, that's one
Hmm.
thing I've always said. Like, once I started therapy till now, is just like your feelings are 110% valid. What you do
Hmm.
with those feelings does matter, but it's
Yes.
okay, you're allowed to feel what you're feeling, but then understanding like what's happening. And that's like a lot of development work and like really getting real with yourself and transparent with yourself of where it's coming from. But I think that's where a lot of people do miss that boat. Like you outlined that so wonderfully, because I do think a lot of times when we are feeling those big emotions, it's really hard to articulate what's going on for us because then the emotion comes out and then people feel like they're attacked or
Yeah.
you're being aggressive or whatever it is. Like there's so many different
Hmm.
entities to it and different layers. But I think that's really important to highlight because our emotions are going to come, but as long as we're able to kind of take a step back and breathe before going into the conversation, it can allow us to really have a clear mind. And it's coming
Yes.
from these are the facts versus like the emotions. It's okay for the emotions, but I think you can have a deeper conversation and actually get somewhere when you are able to talk about the facts. And that's like what I'm hearing you
Yeah.
say as well. It's like
Hmm.
to the meat of it once all the like fats off of it, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Like emotions are a part of human nature and we're human. And at some point they need to factor into communication, especially high tension scenarios. And the sooner we recognize our emotions as being a valid starting off point for conversations, I think the sooner we'll be able to connect with people that perhaps we feel initiated those emotions. But those are emotions are ours, so we have to take ownership of them. And I know this is diving a little bit into therapy, but this is just so much of the work I do with people that are in leadership roles, executive roles. I'm like, if you're feeling angry about something, I want you to follow the breadcrumbs and figure out why. Like, look at the data behind it because you will find something whether you've ignored something, whether you lack a boundary, whether someone has crossed a boundary, and then you could follow up on it accordingly, but like just not taking that moment to pause and just reacting instead of responding. That's where the issues come in. Yeah, so I think that you just articulated that perfectly.
Likewise. I mean, oh, this is so juicy. I'm like, I just want to talk more about it. Like, there's so many examples running
Yeah.
through my head of just like conversations. But how do you think that applies when starting a business too? Just even like working with like new clients and setting those boundaries. Have you come across things where you've had to really exert those boundaries or communication in your own practice?
I think that as a new entrepreneur, the most, maybe I'll just say cringy. The cringiest thing that I have to do is like follow up for payment. But I just treat it like an HR conversation that I've had. If someone is like made a mistake on my paycheck, it's very objective, where it's just like, hey, payment was due this day. Can you please get this in as soon as possible? Very clear, very direct, no emotion attached. So that's something I try to keep in the back of my mind because I'm not used to following up with people for that type of stuff. And it doesn't happen all the time at all, but that's just one thing I have noticed. And if any entrepreneur is listening and they have this issue, like you're not alone. I've seen so many forums on this online. And I think the best way to handle it is, and this is another thing that I've learned through practice and the little bumps, is writing it out in the contract. So I'll say, like, if the payment isn't received on this day, like, this is the cadence I'll follow up with you on. These are the forms of communication you'll have. And then giving people a lot of time for payment too. And then setting reminders ramping up to due date is just helpful. So I think that kind of goes back to boundary setting, like communicate them clearly and frequently, and then being willing to enforce them too. So let's say this hasn't happened, but if a payment weren't going to come through, I'd say, like, unfortunately, I'm not able to work with you. Here are a few free resources I'd be happy to share. Let's circle back when we're ready to work together, whatever that would sound. So that's like the one time it's come up, but it's not frequent at all.
Yeah, this is such a good topic because I literally just had this conversation yesterday with somebody and we were talking about this and she's like, yeah, I had no idea that this was ever an issue. And like
Mhm.
it was articles that she was reading or something. And I was like, oh, that's so fascinating. But I remember in the beginning of even my journey, there was a lot of those discussions because coaching was very, like, I mean, it's been around for a long time, but
Mhm.
like we were all kind of new coaches at that point, 7 years
Mhm.
ago now. But I think it's interesting because some people will not pay or there's like situations, and I think that goes to lack of boundaries. If you don't have it stated clearly in your contract, you don't have the expectations set from the get-go, like
Mhm.
all of those things. And that's why you probably don't see it very frequently because you've already set those boundaries. But I think it's so important, this conversation, just even about communication and boundaries when you're
Mhm.
starting a business, no matter what the contract looks like, whatever it may be, but just stating those expectations from the beginning and being clear and concise can save
Mhm.
a lot of trouble in the long run. Because I've done
Mhm.
that where I've had partnerships and it wasn't in a contract. And then I was like, oh, a lot of things happened. And I've learned
Yeah.
so much from that experience. But I feel like with what you just said too, there might be new entrepreneurs that might not even be thinking of like having that in the contract, but being very clear and concise. So you can just like remove any of those barriers that might come up.
Yes, yes. And I think it's interesting because for me, before I started coaching, before I was a manager, it was always easier to advocate for someone else. So I just have to like put myself into like that mindset where I'm like advocating for business Adriana and I'm like Adriana's boss in that situation where I'm like, hey, you just like payment needs to be, it has to happen. And like I think I'm like, man, if I were to go to McDonald's and get fries, would they give me fries if I didn't pay? No. If I were to go to Macy's and get a dress, would they give it to me if I didn't pay? No. So, like, why is our service any different?
Yeah.
It's not. We're helping people, we're providing value to people's lives. And that has been a 16-year journey of developing my expertise, a lot of degrees, a lot of certifications, a lot of personal experience that I'm trying to expedite for people. So, like, that's how I now feel comfortable navigating those cringy conversations, is just like being an advocate for myself. So, it's a big thing for entrepreneurs. And it's so funny you had that conversation recently, too.
I feel like the universe always throws me certain things right before an interview.
Yeah.
Keeps it relevant.
Mhm.
But I appreciate you saying that. And I'm curious because, you've already given a lot of insight just from your journey and your experiences. Do you have like your top 2 or 3 tips for entrepreneurs listening that have really benefited you in this process and
Yeah.
journey?
Yes. I think the first one is also a reminder to myself. Just be
Yeah.
gracious with yourself. There's no right or wrong way to be an entrepreneur. By default, you're filling a gap in the system you see somewhere.
Yeah.
And a lot of times there's no right or wrong way to do that. I think that you'll figure out ways that are wrong for you, For instance, like I tried ads just for funsies. Those are not for me. My business is very interpersonal, it's very relationship based. Everybody that I've worked with, I've known on some level, or it's a referral, which is good. That's what I want. I want people to like know about my services and feel comfortable coming to me because it creates a safer space for them, even if it's just someone that sees me on a video like this. So be gracious with yourself as you figure out systems that work for you. And then the second I would just speak to, just from like also personal experience, is like plan out your week at the beginning or whatever planning looks like. So, what is actually going to move the needle in your business? Is it prospecting? Is it building out those back end systems? Is it keeping track of your CRM? Is it marketing on different platforms? So, figuring out what works specific for your business is huge because everybody's different. And a business coach, if they're good, will not tell you what to do, but advise you. And they'll help you figure out your own insights into your business because nobody knows your business like you do, even if you're growing. So perhaps they'll advise you on like large level things, but it's really up to entrepreneurs to figure out what works for them in their industry because it's all so different. And even the way that we operate as human beings, the way we connect with people, the way we get business and build those relationships is different. So be gracious with yourself and then figure out what works specifically for you. I think that is huge. And then that'll help you hold yourself accountable as you plan out your week and figuring out what actually moves the needle in your business and progresses everything.
Yes, I love it. I feel like we all need to be a little more gracious with ourselves and have a little bit more compassion because this
Hmm.
is not an easy journey. There's rocks and everything else that we have to
Hmm.
climb and step over sometimes, but I think that's so valuable and just planning it out and realizing, even with coaching, if you get a business coach, it's just important to realize that it is up to you because they can guide you, but not telling
Hmm.
you what to do because that's not what a coach does. It's
Hmm.
asking the powerful questions to guide you to get that answer, but it
Hmm.
is on you to find out what is necessary in your industry, researching and doing all the things on the back end. But I love the
Hmm.
plan aspect because that's how I function. My brain can't function without a plan because I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
what am I doing? But what you said was so key is moving the needle forward. What is
Hmm.
the result producing activities you're doing to grow
Hmm.
your business if that's what you're wanting to do?
Yeah.
So,
And the other thing I would add is I have ADD sometimes,
uh,
and I think staying focused. So like for me, like when I first started to, I wanted to help nurses, then I wanted to help people in hospitality, then I wanted to help fintech. And it's like focus, like get really good. And I think that not wanting to niche down, I like was so distracted. And so like once I figured out what moves the needle, it's like getting really good at one thing. So like I would just add that really quick too, because I wanted to help everybody. And then by doing that, I couldn't help anybody.
Oh, my goodness. You're speaking to me like recently and like years ago, and so many other people, I'm sure. But you're right. It's getting really clear on what you want to do because if you're helping everyone, you're helping no one. And that is absolutely true. Even when I was like coaching, I was like, I want to do this, I want to do that. And even now, I do like 10 million things, but it's like, okay, focus, focus. What's going to actually move things forward? And I think that's so valuable. All three tips are so valuable in order to be gracious, be able to get clear on what you're doing, the work you're doing, and staying focused on one thing to help grow that. And then you can add other things. Look at all the
Mhm.
brands that have been able to create one entity and then they start moving into other aspects as well.
Mhm.
But it's starting and getting really clear, no matter what your business is or industry, whether it's a product or a service. But
Mhm.
love those tips. And I know you've already accomplished so much, and you're like, I feel like you're just getting started, but you've already done so much as well. What are your future aspirations and goals for you, for your business, and where you see it going?
Oh my gosh. So I am also launching a podcast, and the name I picked is Sedate the Stress, a Healthcare Leader's Open Diary. And it's going to be from someone that has been a leader in healthcare for healthcare leaders. It's a very niche industry, but it's high stress. I mean, healthcare is high stress. And so I'm really excited to grow that. The format is going to be me chatting about my blunders. I'll always be vulnerable with everybody. Like, I don't care if that helps one person from making the mistake. Like, I will share it all. I don't care, especially in leadership. It's hard. Like, I'll just say it. Like, people are like, leadership's intuitive sometimes, but it's also really hard. And I think being intentional about it and learning from people in these different types of mentorships in the podcast, maybe someone will find someone that really resonates with them. I'm hoping to create a safe community for people that are leaders in the healthcare space. So that is something I'm growing. I am just diving deeper into my niche of helping frontline managers, females in STEM professions. That is something I'm just like diving deeper and deeper into. And that is who I am. I've realizing that the people I attract are female professionals that maybe they don't like conflict, or maybe they realize that to grow their business, they need to grow their leadership. And so those are my people I find I'm working with the most. And I'm just going to keep diving into that niche and learning more about them so I could help them even more with my coaching. So as that grows, I'll just be deepening my own knowledge of these individuals to make sure that I provide the best service to them and bring the most value. So I would say goals. I would love to continue partnering with healthcare institutions, helping their leadership teams, and working with individuals as well. As you know, I'm in the middle of like a rebrand transition. I'm really excited. So that way I can be super clear with anybody that stumbles across my stuff. They'll know exactly what I do, exactly who I help, and how I help them. So that'll all be very clear here in the next few weeks as it's published. But I'm excited to keep just diving into my niche and serving people on an even deeper level.
Oh, I love it. And I can't wait for all of this to unfold for you and help so many people, because you're right. I think there's so many women in leadership roles that are craving that like communication, being able to really lead from the front and like bringing everybody with them at the same time and learning how to do that most effectively for each individual. But
Mhm.
it's just helping the masses. That's what you're doing. By helping one person, you're helping that whole team and that whole organization as well. Like bridge things back together. But there might
Mhm.
be some cracks in some places as well.
Mhm.
But I've been so enjoying this conversation, Adrianna. Where can people find you, find your services? We're going to link everything below, but if you could let us know too.
Yes, so I am at www.adrianamunoz.com and then admin at adrianamunoz.com. And you could go ahead and reach me there, and I'll send Caroline all the links so that way you all have them as well. And I'm so excited. Thank you for your time. This is really cool.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on and just sharing the journey, the ups and downs, being so vulnerable and transparent of how crazy the journey's been,
Yeah.
but where you are today and will continue to grow and thrive. So thank you again for coming on, and make sure to like, subscribe, comment below. What was
Mhm.
the biggest takeaway from Adrianna today? I'm sure she would love to see that comment, and we'll see you on the next episode.